Welcome back. Happy February.
Hey, it's February. You always make jokes. We always make jokes about the years flying by. So if you haven't taken your Christmas tree down yet, it's time. Come on, it's February.
That's
Uh,
right.
get that stuff put away. But it
Yeah.
does fly by, and a lot going on.
Yeah. It's funny because
Yes,
I've met with a lot of students this past week, and we keep talking about how there's really only like a few months left of the school year,
right.
which is ridiculous to consider.
Another year. Yeah, it'll be spring break in March, and then testing and cleaning up and finishing up the school year. So it accelerates. And this is when most of the work comes due. This is the busiest time of the school year in terms of accomplishing the curriculum.
Absolutely. And
We're
today,
going to talk a little bit about that today, aren't we?
we are, and I think that it's going to be it's an interesting conversation that we're going to have today because we're going to talk about we've all heard about the terrible twos, right?
And teens, right?
And we've
Hmm.
heard about the challenges with teenagers, but came across an article about 8-year-olds,
Yeah.
hateful eights, and it's a phrase, the hateful eights, something I had never heard before.
I hadn't either. And when the headline that came across was something about this is really the worst year. And I thought, well, it has to be the twos or threes.
Right.
Or the teenage years. This is going to be another one of those articles about, okay, the teenage years are tough. But all of a sudden you start reading and say, no, it's when they're eight that's the most difficult, challenging time for parents is when kids are eight. And I thought, oh, I got to look at this and see what they're talking about.
And I get it. The thing that I always think about though when I see that stuff is I think the hardest time with raising kids is whatever time it is that you're raising kids. It's like
Okay,
the-
you should have given a trigger warning
it's like
because that's absolutely true. It's always difficult.
yeah, it's like the challenges are different for
Mhm.
different things going on. You have to, parents sometimes so often think, well, it worked when he was 4, and now he's 14, and for some reason it's not working anymore. Like you have to
No, wait
keep
a minute. How did you phrase that? You said it's every time is the most difficult time. How'd you say
whenever
it?
you're raising kids, that's the most difficult time to raise kids. Is when you're raising them, that's when it's most difficult time to raise them.
Right. And the other point you make is, well, it worked when he was 4, so why
Right.
isn't it working anymore?
Yeah.
Well, because he's not 4 anymore.
Right. Yeah, you have to keep adjusting and adapting. But this idea of the hateful eights, as you get into it a little bit, you start to see and understand a little bit about where this author is coming from. Um,
Hmm.
I just I feel like I just needed to throw that in there because I'm sure that you could go on the internet and find all kinds of articles about all different ages about how,
Right.
oh, actually it's 5-year-olds that are the really tough ones because that's when they're starting kindergarten. And then, oh, but those 6-year-olds, whew,
Mhm.
they're tough. So
Right.
it's like you can find all kinds of stuff, and so you really need to make sure that you're getting information from credible sources and that kind of stuff. So.
Right. Yeah. So, so there are 2 points we want to make here. One is, what is it about an 8-year-old that
Yeah.
makes it so challenging? But the other point is, every age has its unique challenges. And as a parent, you need to remain flexible and adaptable because you have to adjust to your child's changes over time. Okay. So those are the two takeaways from this podcast.
Right. So we have to think about for a minute what is it about eight that certainly brings it to the attention of this particular
Mhm.
author, um, and but also what do we already know about the age of eight? And
Right.
there are some things. For example, we have talked on podcasts before. We talk about socialization,
Mhm.
and emotional regulation, and we have said many times before that if a student doesn't have isn't socialized, doesn't have emotional regulation by the end of third grade, by the time they reach 9 years old,
Hmm.
which would mean that within their eighth year,
That eighth
should
year. Hmm.
have met some
Hmm.
of these developmental milestones of socialization and emotional regulation. And if they haven't, you're going to be in for some difficulties because
Right.
the probability, the likelihood of them gaining it after that is far smaller.
That's right. That's an extremely important mile marker for
Mhm.
child development and for parenting, is that at the end of age 8, a child should that certainly not having any more temper tantrums, but they really should be able to regulate their emotions almost in an adult-like way, that they're not falling apart. If they are, then it might indicate that there's a more serious problem.
Right,
But emotional regulation should be achieved. A temper tantrum should have gone before age 5.
right.
But we're talking about emotional regulation, and they should be able to manage their emotions by age 8.
Absolutely. Now, there's some other things like, you usually by the age of 8, kids have all of their articulation sounds when they're speaking. They
Hmm.
should, age 8, again, we're talking about third grade. This is why the focus of No Child Left Behind, it was really
Right.
focused on this third grade milestone of, all kids should be reading at grade level.
Hmm.
But part of that socialization and emotional regulation is that they can handle school, they can handle their belongings and manage their stuff, and so all of these things we sort of expect to happen at by age 8.
Hmm.
That doesn't necessarily mean that the age of 8 is going to be a really difficult time necessarily,
Right. Hmm.
but it is an important milestone in development.
Yeah, and you can see that when we talk about by the age of 8 or 9, um, when the National Reading Panel did its work in the 90s, what they did in that huge lit review was to say, wow, kids who aren't reading at grade level by the end of third grade have a very hard time catching up.
Mhm.
It's not that they can't catch up, but it's very difficult after third grade. So you should have all your speech sounds. You should be reading at grade level, and you should be able to manage your own schooling.
Right.
I remember when my son was in third grade, one parent, we were fascinated by this because I had never seen it before. A parent would go into her son's classroom at the end of each day and copy down what all the homework assignments were for that day.
Mhm.
Um, and I thought, wow, that was really weird. And apparently her son wouldn't write the assignments down. And then when they got a cell phone, she would just take a picture of the of the whiteboard, which had all the assignments on it. And so she was doing for him what he wasn't doing by the time he was in third grade. And this continued into middle school and high school with him. He never did get it right. So you should be able to manage your own schooling, but you also should be able to manage your belongings. If your
Mhm.
child's getting up in the morning in third and fourth grade and say, I can't find my shoes and I don't know where my uniform is and I can't find that's a problem that you need to address because they should be able to manage all of their belongings. I don't know where my soccer boots are. I don't know where my baseball shoe. I don't know where my baseball
Right.
glove is. That shouldn't be happening
Right.
after third
Right.
grade.
Well,
Yeah.
and we also think about eighth grade, 8 years old, that eighth year, as important because like you said, they're taking care of themselves, they're taking care of
Hmm.
their own things. But they're gaining. They want to do more on their own.
Right.
Want to be independent, and they want all of that. And I think that it's just interesting because we do think about 8-year-olds from this sense that by the time they're I think about it more grade level than age,
Yeah.
because
Right.
it's easier to think about third graders.
Right.
We kind of bunch together kindergarten, first and second. They kind of bunch together.
That's right.
We bunch together third, fourth, and fifth, and so
Hmm.
third is this transition. And all of the transitions that happen when you go into third grade, third grade is when you start taking high stakes testing. Third grade is when you know, we've always talked about that shift from learning how to read in kindergarten, first and second, to reading to learn in
Right.
third, fourth, and fifth, and so on. So there's a lot of these transitions and expectations and demands and everything that's placed on the kids.
Mhm.
And it really, and ironically enough, one of the tests, not ironically, interestingly enough, maybe one of the tests that we use when we look at ADHD and learning disabilities and things like that, we use a test, a common test. It's called the Dallas Kaplan. I know one of your favorites. We were talking about that yesterday,
You
but
couldn't resist.
I couldn't. But the kid has to be 8 years old before you can give that test.
That's true. Right.
So historically, we've always looked at eight as this time when, the research says that most typically, if you're going to diagnose ADHD, you've done it by the age of 8. It's usually around the age of 7 or 8 that you make that diagnosis. Learning disabilities, historically, when we did assessments and testing
Yeah.
for learning disabilities, it was usually third graders that we
By
were
third
testing.
grade.
So
Yeah,
the
the discrepancy formula didn't
right,
work until third grade.
right.
Then you got the gap between. Yeah, that's right. I hadn't thought about that.
Yeah. So
Mhm.
so it is this interesting time frame, but again, you don't necessarily we haven't necessarily thought about it as, man, those 8-year-olds are so difficult. But I guess
Right.
there was a poll that was conducted in 2020 of a whole
Right.
bunch of parents, and for all a bunch of parents identified the age of 8 as the hardest age to parent.
Uh, I was, I mean, we'll of course go back and see who did the polling and how many parents were involved. But I was surprised by this.
Yeah,
That even that many parents um, would consider that the most difficult year. I
yeah,
I don't I don't know
yeah.
why.
So they called
And
it the hateful eights.
yeah, I've never heard that term before, the hateful eights.
Right. And they offered four in this article. We'll post a link in the show notes. Um, but they gave four explanations
Mhm.
for why parents identified 8-year-olds as the most difficult.
Mhm.
And the first is interesting, is it goes along with a lot of the stuff that we've been talking about, but it's at this age that kids start to develop a very sharp sense of independence.
Mhm.
Now that begins early on. A lot of those terrible twos, saying
Right.
no and doing all that stuff, that's the beginning of it.
Right.
But it is again around third grade that you start seeing this really sharp turn that goes even more towards this independence and kids just wanting to do things on their own, hopefully wanting to do things on their own, wanting to do those things and needing to do those things for themselves, to take care of themselves, and not wanting other people to do it.
And that's one of the striking things about this article that was sort of an epiphany for me, is that so much of child rearing is battling against independence seeking, because that's really what you're dealing with at ages 2 or 3, because kids want to do it themselves. And then teenagers want to do it themselves. Young adults want to do it themselves. So there's this tension between parents and children. And much of that tension is due to children wanting more independence, wanting more, um, they want to be on their own. They want to be able to do things on their own. And this is about when we talk about you have to keep adapting, one of the things you have to keep adapting to is a child's ability to seek and gain independence. And the difference with an 8-year-old is they have developed some skills where they can start getting pretty manipulative. I mean, they learn how to lie, they learn how to manipulate, they
Right.
learn how to sneak around. And it's a much different challenge at 8 than it was at 5 or 6.
Well, and what's so interesting because your example of from when your kids were in third grade and the mom that would come in and copy down her son's assignments, they want independence in the areas that they want to be independent.
It's true.
But let's be clear about that. They
All
don't,
right,
it's
that's
not like
true.
they have this world view of I'm going to be independent in all things in life and
Right.
I'm going to do all this stuff. No, they are independent in the fact that they want to do what they want to do, and and don't they don't want anybody telling them that they need to do something else.
Yeah.
It's easier to get a second grader to do their homework,
Mhm.
but once they get into third grade and you're trying to get them to do their homework, it starts to get a little bit or a lot bit tough.
Right. I had a boy recently, and he was having trouble in middle school, and which was kind of odd. So I talked to him. I went back into what about elementary school, and he said, "Oh, I was in elementary school when I realized that nobody could stop me from doing what I wanted to do." He said, "I was in elementary school. He's in high school now, but he said I was in elementary school when I knew that nobody could really stop me from doing what I wanted to do."
Yeah, and that's sort of the second point that they make is that
Right.
around this age is when kids become unafraid to push
Mhm.
boundaries and say, you know, I hear you telling me that these are
Right.
things that I need to do. I just think it's dumb. I'm not going to do it.
Right.
And they don't.
Right.
I mean, parents can make their kids' lives miserable
Hmm.
until they do it, perhaps. But otherwise, there are kids who just won't. And
Hmm.
how many parents, Richard, come into our office and say, I don't even know what to do. Nothing matters to him. I take everything away. And he'll just sit there. And, it defies all the behaviorism that people sort of rely on. But
Mhm.
it's what it is. The
Right.
kids just won't do what they don't want to do.
That's right. And this happens at about halfway through elementary school. This is
Yeah.
when it begins, and then they burst into middle school. But the seeds are planted in elementary school. They're not only disobedient, they're a little bit more disobedient, but they're also defiant. Now they're starting to express things like they begin rolling their eyes and they'll argue with you about chores and homework and who's going to walk the dog. And they're able to explain their frustrations in ways that parents aren't ready for. Parents always say, "What? Who's this kid?" Because
Yeah.
they weren't able to articulate their frustrations when they're in kindergarten or first grade. By third and fourth grade, they can they're very clear about what they don't like, and they don't mind telling you what they don't like.
Absolutely.
So there are these changes that occur
Hmm.
around age 8. Um, and interestingly, at about the same time, school is no longer fun. And we've said that for many, many years. We've known that kids, when they hit third grade, the joy, the novelty of school has worn off. Kindergarten was fun, first grade was fun, second grade was okay. Suddenly in third grade, there's a lot, and this was before high stakes testing.
Right.
Third grade was a much more difficult year, and kids just said, this is no longer fun. This is work, and I don't like it.
Right. And I think that high stakes testing only made it worse
Made it
because
worse, right?
what
Mhm.
high stake I can remember when early on when early after No Child Left Behind and some of that high stakes testing really was taking off. I can remember how third graders were so different
Mhm.
second graders and earlier because if the way that it is here in Florida and many other states anyways, if you don't pass that test you don't go to fourth grade, and
Right.
kids know that day one.
It's drummed into them every day.
And I can remember talking with you talk with kindergartners and first graders and they're excited about going to the next school year. Second graders dreaded the idea of going to third grade.
Right. Yeah, because the bar got really high really fast.
Right.
And they scared them to death. Okay. It seemed like a good idea, but we get into the unintended consequences.
Right.
It seemed like, okay, let's really buckle down in third grade. Didn't work out as well as we hoped it would.
Right.
Okay. So the second issue that we want to talk about with this, so we know that, lo and behold, maybe 8 is a difficult time for kids and parents. Is it the most difficult time? Not sure it's the most difficult time, but it is a difficult time. But it goes back to the point that you made at the beginning. when you think about whether it's the terrible twos, the hateful eights, or the terrible teens, there are a couple of essential things that you need to keep in mind if you are parenting children, especially if you're a new parent. Parenting is a full-time job. And I
Mhm.
think we forget about it. Bernie, I was somewhere last night. Oh, we were at a restaurant, and these people it was family after family, and these little children had, um, I don't know what they're called, tablets.
Mhm.
Okay, colorful big plastic tablets, and
Mhm.
they're using them as they're walking into the restaurant, and
Right.
they're using them in the restaurant.
Mhm.
And I thought, well, okay, so you're bringing along the nanny,
Right.
essentially. You know,
Absolutely.
you're allowing your children to be on these devices, and these are kids who are 4, 5, and 6 years old by
Mhm.
the looks of them. Parenting is a full-time job. You have to prepare for a very long campaign. It is never going to be easy.
Right.
There is no easy time when you're raising children. As you
Yeah.
said earlier, every age has its challenges.
Absolutely. And some things, you said a moment ago that maybe the eights, hateful eights are kind of difficult. Not sure if it is the most difficult. And part of that has to do with your kid, and part of that
Right,
has to do with your parenting, because
right.
there are absolutely kids who, I mean, let's just be honest. There are some kids who make it through all of these developmental stages smooth, and it is
Mhm,
easy. And everybody in the world is jealous of those parents because those kids are just they don't really have a lot of tantrums when they're 2 years old.
mhm,
They socialize, they adjust to kindergarten and elementary school very easily. They go
mhm.
through this third grade stage without any problems. There are some anomalies where
But they are. They really are. I mean,
yeah. And then there are those who don't. And there are
mhm,
those who and I think the parents that I feel that I just feel for are those who had the really easy kid first, and then they had the really challenging kid.
right.
Um,
Mhm,
and because they're pulling their hair out, thinking, the first one was so easy. They just went
right.
through the stuff. So, and all the things that we did with her is not working with him. And don't understand. And it's biology, it's a lot of other things, but
Mhm,
we have to learn to understand what our kids are going through at these different stages and adapt to what's going on because
right.
some things are going to be easy. I saw on TikTok the other day a guy he was talking about it was a teacher and he said, all this stuff, we're not getting political here, but it was just funny because he said, all this talk about teachers indoctrinating kids into all these things.
Mhm.
And he said, let me tell you something. If I was going to indoctrinate your kids to do anything, it would be to wear deodorant. And for some kids, even self-care and hygiene is
Right.
for some it's super easy. They start doing it
Mhm.
really. And there are some kids that you can't even get them to wear deodorant.
You can't get them to take a shower.
And if you
We
don't
live in
you don't know
Florida.
why.
Yeah, right.
Because you'd think that there'd be so many social so many social consequences to not
Right.
deodorant because when you get into middle school, if you're a boy, if you're a
You
girl,
stink.
you do too. But if you're a boy, you stink in
Right.
middle school. And to not experience the social consequence of that and say, you know what, I'm going to start wearing deodorant from now on is fascinating.
Right. But some kids just fight it.
They just
Okay. And some kids will fight you. And again, how many times have we said you raise the child you have? Okay.
right.
So number one, it's a full-time job. Number two, every age has its challenges. My son and daughter-in-law have a neonate, an infant, it's about 2 months old now. They're struggling like mad with sleep. Okay, they're trying to establish a sleep schedule. They've got nursing down, baby's gaining weight, but now nobody's sleeping or they're not sleeping at the right time. That's just the challenge for this particular time. A
Right.
couple months from now, there'll be a new challenge. Okay,
Yeah.
there is always a challenge. So it's your obligation. So the third thing is it's your obligation as a parent to know what's happening at each age. That's your challenge. Okay. When a child is first born, the brain is capable of doing just a couple of simple things. You know, it's mostly responses. and they can't do very much at that age. But as it grows, as the baby grows, as the brain grows and responds to its environment, it's constantly changing. And that I think is the message here, that this is not a still photo.
Mhm.
Parenting and raising children is a movie that is different every day. It's challenging every day. Okay. There's a reason why kids don't speak when they're 6 months old, and the brain is not capable of doing that. Those things will emerge over time. And one of the things you have to do is you have to know when those things are emerging so that you can be available for your child at that time.
Right. That's why in in our original parenting book
Mhm.
that we wrote what feels like eons ago, um,
Right,
the first leg of the three-legged stool is what we call it behavior management, but it is understanding child development.
right.
You have to know what's going on at different stages to know what to expect.
Mhm. Mhm.
As you said, at birth, the brain's only capable of doing a few things. Most of those things are reflexes.
That's right. Primitive reflexes. Mhm.
So when an infant is crying, it is because they have a need.
Right.
It is not because they're trying to manipulate something. We talked about this a little bit in a recent
Yeah, a
podcast,
couple
that you're
weeks
not going
ago.
to
Mhm.
spoil an
No.
infant.
And
After
an
the
infant is
one,
birth to 12 months.
right.
I
After the
mean,
age of one, it's different,
right.
but you have to adjust and adapt to what's going on as the brain
Mhm.
grows.
Right. And it doesn't matter whether it's speech or walking or toilet training. You can't toilet train a child at 12 months of age because they simply don't have the neurological mechanisms that they need.
I know it's so fat. It's so funny when some parents will come in and they'll be like, "Oh yeah, he's been toilet trained since he was 10 months old."
Mm.
So tell me about that. Well, it wasn't toilet train. It was that he was on a good routine. So the parents knew when he needed to go to the bathroom, and so they went and put him on the toilet at the times when he needed to go to the bathroom. It
Right.
wasn't like this 10-month-old is saying, "I think I need to go to the bathroom,
Right.
mother."
That's
And
right. I
you
feel
know,
like I have to go to the bathroom. You don't have that feeling when you're
a,
10 months.
a 10-month-old doesn't even really have the physical development to be able to clean themselves and to manage everything in the bathroom. So it's just, you know, we do things as parents to and adapt to our kids, and but we have to really understand what is realistically expected at different ages.
Right. So our 2 cents here. We'll issue our 2 cents at the end. Number one, you're raising a constantly changing person, and you have to keep up with the changes. And it's always challenging because you're trying to have a life too.
Right.
If you were a nanny and you devoted your life, and 2 generations ago, mothers devoted their lives. They were home all day.
Mhm.
Wasn't much else to do. And they did devote themselves to their children. Today, most women are working. Most mothers are working outside the home. So you're raising a constantly changing person. You have to keep up with those changes. Second, physical development will happen,
Mhm.
and you have to keep up with that physical development. And it's not only their motor development. We tend to think of did my child crawl? Is she walking? Is she able to ride a bike? We're talking about all 5 areas of development are constantly occurring, and you have to keep up with those physical changes, including brain changes. Okay.
Mhm.
You have to obey. And as I watch my children raise their children, I realize that you need to obey. My children don't know brain development. I mean, they're not neurologists or neuroscientists or brain specialists. So they know a little bit about child development and what they've heard and seen. Um, Hopefully, they're getting accurate information. But as I watch them, I realize they don't understand what their children's brains are doing.
Mhm.
Okay. And what I what I'm trying to get them to understand is your children can't do anything until the brain can do it.
Right.
And but they don't understand brain development.
Right.
Erik Erikson understood brain development, and he has these wonderful stages of development, which are really based on brain development. I mean,
Right.
he didn't know that at the time, but that's what they're doing. And we don't, most people don't understand brain development.
Right.
And so you have expectations. Frequently, we have expectations. Either they're lower than they should be,
Right.
such as the third grader being able to manage his own work, or they exceed what the child's able to do.
Right. Yeah. And it's there are absolutely things, parts of that development that we can foster and we can nurture to grow, faster. But there is still a limit to what that is.
Right.
You are not going to have a 3-month-old that's walking, regardless. No, there's just no
Doesn't
way.
matter what you do.
Now, can they walk at 10 months? 12 is, what we t consider typical. Can they walk
Mhm.
at 10 months? Sure. There
Yeah.
are lots of kids that walk at 10 months and they're in those situations. Are there kids that don't walk until 14 months? Absolutely. Does it
Yep.
mean there's a problem with their development? Not necessarily. It's just we can create, it just may mean that their parents or whoever held them more
Right.
than
Right.
they should. But we have to, as you said, we just have to be aware that the brain is developing, and whatever it is about 8-year-olds that may make them difficult, a lot of that is based in brain development. A lot of that is based in just what they're going through socially, culturally,
Right.
and biodevelopmentally. and
Mhm.
and we have to think about the relationship between all of those things and how they inform each other and result in this
Mhm.
thing that's sitting here in front of us.
This thing, this challenge that's it's
Right.
important. And it is, it's challenging. But the important point here is and you said it at the beginning, it's challenging every day. Every
Right.
moment has its challenges.
Right. Yeah,
And that's if they don't get sick and flu and all the rest of that stuff. That just makes everything worse. But just the
right
normal day-to-day stuff.
because as difficult as an 8-year-old is, give it 2 years. Wait until they're in middle school. Then what's most difficult?
Think 12-year-olds bad. Wait till they're 16 and they go out with their and you don't know where they're going because they're getting into a car with somebody else and
Yeah,
they're going places that you don't even know about.
absolutely. So, all right. Well, I think that's it for today. We love talking about child development and the joyful dread that we have at every developmental stage.
That's right. The
All right.
joyful dread. Okay. I'm going to write this stuff down.
Yeah. All right. And until next time, stay happy, stay healthy, and forget to be afraid.